Batista, Dave Bautista, a man as solid as a mountain, as famous in wrestling as he is successful in Hollywood. He loves the spotlight, yet he hates it at the same time. There are two sides to Batista: the loud and the quiet, the faithful and the unfaithful, the brave and the fearful, the peaceful and the violent. I want to be a peaceful, passive person. That's my nature. But if it calls for it, I'm gonna punch you in the face. Batista's personality is like a jigsaw puzzle. In this documentary, we put the pieces together and peek behind the shiny facade of the megastar. Crushing setbacks and hard-earned tears of joy tell a life story both shocking and fascinating. I have a love-hate relationship with my lifestyle. Girls were always an issue. He always looked kind of sad. I had no future until I started wrestling. It didn't go according to plan. The rivalry wasn't actually the stuff in the ring. It was behind the scenes. I thought I was going to lose my job. I've never seen Dave cry so hard. When Batista talks about his dark past in interviews, he doesn't pull any punches. His childhood was marred by violence and poverty. Man, we had nothing. A lot of times they didn't come for free. Dave's parents split when he was just 1 year old. He never got to know his father. He was like a stranger. I don't know what it's like to have a father. I just don't know him. He doesn't know me. I just don't have a connection with him. Growing up, Dave Bautista never really had a place to call home. He shared one mattress with his sister and mother in a damp basement room. We actually lived in the basement of this house. So, right where that door is, that's where we lived. Right outside the door, gangs were shooting up the block. There were blood stains on the sidewalk. It was no place for a child. Outside was scary. Washington, D.C. in the 80s and 90s. Horrible place. I mean, really dangerous. I think I saw and witnessed a lot more than most other kids. I've been in the middle of people shooting in the street. Growing up on the rough side of town left its marks on Dave Batista. It shaped him. He had the wrong friends, the wrong role models, so he made the wrong decisions. I was a product of my environment. I was never a violent kid, but I got in a lot of fights. I was never a thief, but I stole. As a teenager, Dave went off the rails. He and his buddies got into carjacking. His aggressive behavior often backfired. He beat up his schoolmates or kids in the neighborhood, and he'd get beaten up too. His mother started to worry more and more about him. I saw it getting worse and worse, and I thought my son's going to either end up dead or in prison. Dave always struggled to find his place socially. He always felt different. I was real shy. I was an introvert. Yeah, I always had a little bit of, social anxiety. School was a constant uphill battle for Dave. He had ADHD and struggled, especially with reading. He often found himself in difficult situations. Sometimes he'd have to read aloud in class, and Dave would sit there sweating, a bundle of nerves. The letters were black and white before him, but he couldn't make sense of them. Dave became an outcast. School was torturous for him, so he stopped going and didn't finish high school. I just didn't want to be there. I just felt like, such an outcast at school. He tried living with his dad for a while, but it felt like living at a stranger's place. Dave still didn't have a home. Then, when he was 17, he got into a nasty fight with his father, one that had serious consequences. My dad kicked me out of the house. Back then, it was really just a matter of making money to buy food and support himself as best he could. I don't know too many kids that age who are out on their own, without a family to support them. Dave was thrown into the deep end early on. He was practically homeless, spending every day just trying to keep his head above water. His address changed daily, surfing one couch after another. Every day he walked the gray streets alone. With nothing else to do, he started hitting the gym and hitting it hard. Bodybuilding became his one focus in life. It gave him the direction he'd been craving. He wanted to bulk up and never be on the losing end of a street fight again. Batista had the perfect genetics for bodybuilding. Still, he turned to steroids, something he talked about in interviews and in his book. He packed on muscle at a breakneck pace. His gym buddies were blown away. No matter what time of day or night they showed up at the gym, there was Dave, pumping iron. Working out became his drug, an addiction that would never let go of him. I looked at Dave and I was like, he had to be the biggest human I had ever seen in my life. His physique earned him respect. Still, he kept getting into scrapes, some very nasty, violent fights. One was so bad it landed him behind bars. You know, I got in a few fights where people may have lost some teeth. And so I was in jail, and I just knew I just didn't belong there. In jail, Batista realized he was on the wrong path. He'd had run-ins with the law before, but this time he really screwed up. When he got out, he started working as a bouncer. I'd work all night. I'd go to the gym. I'd sleep all day. I'd go back to the gym. Then I'd work all night again. In 1990, something happened that turned Batista's life upside down. Dave became a father. He tied the knot with his girlfriend, Glenda, and 2 years later, they welcomed their second daughter into the world. Dave was in over his head as a dad, but it finally pulled him out of his life of crime. He wanted to step up and take responsibility. Then another woman entered his life. Angie, I just thought he was absolutely, amazingly beautiful. I really did. I've never seen anyone of his size. I always had an interest in bodybuilding and things like that. He always looked kind of sad, and I just remember thinking to myself, I'm gonna make him smile. They met at the gym. Soon enough, Batista was cheating on the mother of his children with Angie. But that's not the end of it. Angie, she actually caught us together. It was probably the most embarrassing moment of my life. That was the nail in the coffin for Batista's first marriage. From then on, Angie and Batista were joined at the hip. Back at the gym, fate had one more chance encounter in store for him. Mr. Perfect and Road Warrior Animal were working out when they noticed Dave. They were blown away by his physique and encouraged him to give wrestling a shot. Dave was already pushing 30, much older than most wrestling prospects, but an idea had taken hold, a dream. He wanted to become a wrestler. Batista, I had no future until I started wrestling. I had nothing. I was broke, penniless, and had no goals or ambition. Batista started wrestling at a WCW tryout. The trainer, Dwayne Bruce, couldn't stand the sight of him. Bruce, Dave will never make it as a wrestler. This remark cut deeply. Batista, I was livid. Who the hell is that little with a big mouth telling me I'm not good enough, that I can't do it? Determined, Dave set his mind to proving all the critics wrong. However, his shy nature often ruined his chances. After a show, a major news channel asked for an interview. He wanted to do it but couldn't. Moments before, he started shaking uncontrollably, overcome with anxiety. When WWE held an event in his hometown, Batista did something completely unexpected. He broke into the Capital One Arena, hoping to catch the attention of bigwigs like Vince McMahon or Jim Cornette. Cunningly sneaking past security, he spent hours searching the hallways, but was eventually caught and thrown out. Determined, Batista sought a different path. He started training with Afa Anoa'i, uncle of Roman Reigns and a wrestling legend. Afa, my job is to recognize talent and let them know, and I did just that. Afa became more than a trainer. He became the father figure Batista never had. Batista, every day he treated me like a son. Under Afa's mentorship, Batista's potential grew. Afa tipped off Vince McMahon, leading to Batista signing with WWE alongside John Cena. Batista's massive presence was undeniable, but the creative team had no big plans for him. He started as Devon's bodyguard, a role he struggled with. Fortunately, Ric Flair and Triple H saw something bigger in him and brought him into their group, Evolution. Batista, Rick, and Triple H were true friends, but others saw me as arrogant or standoffish. It wasn't that. I was just introverted. Being an introvert in a world full of extroverts made Batista feel like a fish out of water. Batista, a lot of times I'd separate myself from the locker room, not because I felt superior, but because I just wanted to be alone. Despite his struggles, Batista proved himself. By 2005, he was slated to win the Royal Rumble. The match didn't go as planned. As Batista hoisted Cena for his finisher, they both tumbled over the top rope simultaneously. Vince McMahon rushed out to restart the match, but tore both quadriceps sliding into the ring. Despite the chaos, Batista won, but blamed himself for the mistake. Batista, I thought I'd lose my job. I went to Vince's office, and he just laughed. That moment haunted me. WrestleMania 21, Triple H worked to make Batista a star, leading to WrestleMania 21. Batista, I was a ball of nerves that week. But once I stepped into the spotlight, the adrenaline hit me like a drug. Batista won the championship and broke down in tears backstage. His wife Angie was waiting for him, and they shared a heartfelt moment. Batista, it was my big night, but I made it her big night too. and proposed to Angie. The two had already been married for 7 years at this point, but for the first proposal, Dave didn't have a ring. He wanted to do it again. He wanted to do it right. But life as a world champion was anything but right for his marriage. His life was that of a megastar, complete with all its dark sides. It was really at that time when my family life, especially my marriage, just really started to fall apart. It was really bad. I was never home. It's hard to connect when someone's home, a few days out of the whole month, not even the week. I was a guy who was always too shy to talk to girls, but all of a sudden, I had girls throwing themselves at me. Batista focused on his wrestling career, and after the grueling shows and the physically and emotionally demanding matches, he went looking for a different kind of thrill. The nightlife, the typical party night, started with him and his wrestling buddies hitting their hotel rooms to freshen up. Then, it was off to the limousine, to the hottest clubs in town. As a celebrated WWE star, Batista was often recognized by fans and promoters, which not only got him free entry into the VIP lounge, but also exclusive perks. The drinks kept coming: champagne, whiskey, and shots en masse. In this world of strobe lights and thumping basses, life as a family man seemed a million miles away. What I wanted was a family, and for the dad to be there. I did become resentful. There was a part of me that started getting angry. While Angie tossed and turned in an empty bed at home, Dave was surrounded by other women. Batista attracted female admiration not just as a wrestling superstar, but also due to his imposing presence. Flirty encounters, selfies with fans, and brief romances, Batista enjoyed this attention. Many women found it thrilling to be near a man who could be so intimidating in the ring and yet so charming and approachable in private. I lived a fast life. Girls were always an issue. I partied way more than I ever had in my life, and way more than I ever should have in my life. But these wild nights came at a price. The next morning often had more in store than a hangover. It was a reality check. The life of a Rolling Stone, with a packed schedule and constant pressure to deliver, meant Dave didn't really have a home. His address changed daily. His kids struggled to cope with their father's absence. I don't really get to see him that often, so that part sort of sucks because he's always working. It's really tough. Eventually, his oldest daughter, Kehlani, couldn't take it anymore, and she ran away from home. Dave writes about it in his autobiography, describing it as one of the toughest times in his life. At 17, she had been kicked out and driven away by her father. Now, he felt like he was the father, driving his child away, and he was doing it simply by not being there. Kehlani lived with friends, just like her father had when his home was no longer a home for him. He saw the bad influences his daughter was exposed to: drugs, teenage pregnancy. Dave became a grandpa in his 30s. It shocked him when he told his colleagues. They couldn't believe it. The balance between his career and family was so far off-center. He was trying to do what he could to provide a life for his family, but he couldn't provide for them everything he wanted. Everything changed for Dave when he met Eddie Guerrero. The warm-hearted Latino liked him, broke through his shyness, and built a deep friendship with him. The two were like brothers, and Dave's relationship with Eddie gave him direction. Eddie had learned the hard way how important family is, as he himself had sacrificed time with his family for too long, pursuing his wrestling dream. Eddie's advice made Dave a better husband and father. Eddie was so many things for Dave, and for the first time, he felt that Dave was getting back on track, with family, with life, with priority, and with work. On November 12th, Dave got a call from Eddie. He told him how much he meant to him and how much he enjoyed working with him. It was the last time Dave heard the warm, helpful, wise voice of his friend. The next day, Eddie Guerrero died from heart problems. The wrestling lifestyle, overexertion, steroids, and drugs had taken his life. I've never seen David cry so hard in my whole entire life. Ever. Out of all the things that we've been through, I have never ever seen him cry that hard. I don't know. It felt like someone just sucked the life out of me, and I think he knew that he lost that guidance. Dave fled even more into his new lifestyle. More matches, more alcohol, more parties, and more women. His marriage to Angie fell apart, and they got divorced. He had never been a bigger star. All the lights were set on him, and at the same time, it was one of the darkest periods in his life. Depression took over. Dave's frustration was obvious to his colleagues too. In an interview with The Sun, Batista spoke disrespectfully about his colleagues at Raw. He said SmackDown was the better show. Raw was hard to stomach. He claimed the wrestlers there lacked passion. These comments earned him a lot of criticism from Vince McMahon and even The Undertaker. For those who never liked Batista to begin with, this unprofessional behavior was a godsend. They criticized him and said that a top star should not make comments like that. Even though they were all part of WWE, they had different groups, and Dave was not welcomed. In 2006, Batista and Booker T butted heads. Booker and I had a lot of heat with one another during a SummerSlam promo shoot. Booker accused Dave of being arrogant, then he challenged him to a real fight. The two brawled in an empty room. There was no clear winner, but the conflict quickly became a hot topic in the locker room. He didn't make himself very welcome by his actions. It was quickly becoming a huge failure. Batista also had real issues with John Morrison. Morrison had been in a long-term relationship with Melina until she started an affair with Batista. Rumors circulated backstage, and Morrison and Batista had it out. But Dave eventually came to terms with being hated by some colleagues. He realized the envy he faced was a symptom of his success. At least, that's how he felt about it. You go from being a very popular guy in the locker room to being a very disliked guy in the locker room because everybody's jealous of your spot. Boys are not here to make friends. We're here to make money. Well, this is business. You've got to choose, man. Do you want to be popular or do you want to be successful? The only way for Batista to silence the critics was through great performances. In his feud against The Undertaker, he impressed everyone with highly praised matches, especially at WrestleMania. I think I opened a lot of eyes, and I finally just proved myself to a lot of people. I really turned it on that night. I really became a major player. Batista lost the match, but won in many aspects. Behind the scenes, there was another rivalry brewing that had a real core, the feud with John Cena. Their rivalry wasn't the stuff in the ring, it was behind the scenes. We were counterparts, and very competitive at the same time. The conflict arose from the question of who was the bigger star. There could only be one figurehead to flagship the company. This top star is usually the one with the biggest title and the biggest paycheck. Batista wanted to be that top star, but WWE was betting mainly on Cena. Considered John to be the number one. He was just like, absolutely, if the company sees John as the top guy, I'm all for it. I'll be here in catering, okay? I'll give her a little, Dave considered himself just as equally talented and just as equally money-making as John Cena was. That was a point of contention for Dave. He didn't feel like he was getting the opportunities. He felt like he was on the level of anyone in that company, as far as drawing a crowd, drawing money. Dave felt left out. John Cena got the big roles in WWE movies. He was supposed to be the new Mr. WWE, the biggest star of this generation. Cena fit perfectly into this era when wrestling was geared more towards children, the so-called PG era, a more family-friendly approach, reducing violence, blood, and adult content, focusing on younger audiences, and promoting merchandising while emphasizing cleaner characters and storylines. John Cena had no problem with that. He was the perfect poster boy for family-friendly entertainment. His message of never give up resonated with young fans. Nena was the type of wrestler that I never wanted to be. He was flashy, very entertaining, but I didn't want to be that guy. Batista the character, and I suppose the human being as well, is not a TV PG kind of guy. Like he's an adult character on a kids show. The problem came to a head during a steel cage match against Chris Jericho. Batista decided to blade, cutting his forehead with a razor to add more drama to the match. Vince McMahon, however, was far from thrilled. Not only did he impose penalties on everyone involved in the match, but he also fined Batista $100,000. Batista paid both his own fine and those of the others. But later on, Chris Jericho's podcast, he shared how devastating this development was for him. The fine had destroyed his love for wrestling and showed him that nothing would ever be the same. Batista decided to leave the company. He fulfilled his contract and faced his biggest rival, John Cena, one last time at Over the Limit 2010. He gave it his all in this fight, taking heavy bumps and severely injuring his spine. It was the worst injury he'd ever had. Backstage, he felt numbness in his legs. Surgery was a must. In the summer of 2010, Dave had no job for years. He had earned millions, but now he suddenly found his bank account in steep decline. I've been poor my whole life, and all of a sudden I'm making millions of dollars. I didn't know how to deal with that. I had no idea. And so I made all the common mistakes I think a lot of professional athletes make when they all of a sudden have all this money. They don't know what to do with it. I bought stupid crap I didn't need. His lavish lifestyle was a big part of the problem. Expensive cars, luxurious mansions, and wild party nights had left deep holes in his pockets. He didn't just splurge on himself. He was generous with friends and family. All this led to his being bankrupt again, broke, just like in his pre-wrestling days. Dave's house was foreclosed. His dream house, his first real home, wasn't his anymore. He had to put all his eggs in one basket, Hollywood. He tried his hand at acting, but without much success. I've seen bad actors, and I've made fun of bad actors, but now, all of a sudden, I'm that bad actor that people are going to be making fun of. There were situations on set where fellow actors would go over the script with Batista. Dave sat there, unsure of himself, sweating. The letters, black and white before him, didn't make sense. But unlike back in high school, he was open about it. He apologized and explained his reading difficulties, something he had been too shy to do in the past. Then he got the role of a lifetime in 2013. Dave played the muscle-bound Drax in Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. The role was his breakthrough. After filming, he celebrated his return to WWE before his big appearance at the 2014 Royal Rumble. His nerves were shot once more. He was afraid that something could go wrong, and something did go wrong. Just before his entrance, the zipper on his boot broke. The crew managed to sew it back together just in time. Batista went out, dominated, and won the Royal Rumble. But the reaction was anything but expected. The fans booed him and criticized the decision, as they wanted to see Daniel Bryan come out on top at WrestleMania 30. At WrestleMania 30, the fans got exactly that when Bryan won the world title in the main event. People weren't really interested in Batista. There was a lot of hate against him on social media. Unlike other wrestlers, he actually read it all, the unvarnished, harsh words about him and his performances. It shook his confidence. Unhappy with his comeback run, he stepped away from wrestling for the second time. But more doors opened in the acting business. Hello, internet, social media trolls out there. See, and I wanted to address the title of our new film, he said. Dave loves his job as an actor. He sees himself as a storyteller, but the downsides of show business still get to him. I have a love-hate relationship with my lifestyle now. People in the film business, in general, they're going somewhere to work for 6 or 7 months at a time. I can't hold down a relationship for decades. Batista's steadiest companion has been deep loneliness, a homelessness. His life moves at a breakneck pace, but he never has time to settle for an arrival. I'm not a bad person. I'm not a bad provider. I'm not an unfaithful person. I just never home. I'm so lonely. Dave now lives in another huge mansion, a property the size of 5 football fields, surrounded by a big fence. But this house isn't a home to him. Time and again, he comes back after a long movie shoot to his private estate, but there's no light in the windows. There's no one home. There's no one waiting for him. No one to welcome him with a hug. In these moments, his depressive thoughts get the best of him. Batista was never able to completely conquer the darkness within him. Some of his tattoos tell of this story. I got all kinds of tattoos, and some of them are cover-ups. Some of them are stories that have been covered up with other stories. Tattoos cover up tattoos or scars, painful memories from the past that sometimes still hurt today. The ink under his skin and the mountains of muscle are like a set of armor for him. Batista stepped into the ring one last time in 2019. By then, he was 50 years old. I don't feel 50, you know? I joke about it a lot. I only notice I'm 50 when hot girls call me sir. Then I'm like, oh, yeah. His comeback on SmackDown was well received, but again, he was plagued by terrible fears of failure. You know, I've got those self-doubts going through my head. Am I in shape? How's my cardio going to be? Is my body going to hold up? You know, I'm wrestling at 50 years old. Batista was set to face Triple H in one big final match. Acting colleagues had advised against it. The risk of injury was too high. But for Batista, it was clear he had to have this last big match. If I had to go for the rest of my life not having this closure on my wrestling career, there would be an emptiness in my soul. I get the worst anxiety, terrible stage fright, horrible stage fright, he said, laughing. I never would have guessed. Nobody understood why he never liked getting to the building earlier. And this is why. Because all I do is sit around and stress. Batista wasn't as good at blocking out the nervousness anymore. He was anxious. He stumbled over his words and promos, and even during his entrance to the ring. Never sees anything good enough, no matter how perfect it is. Whether it's wrestling or acting, it's never good enough, and he chases that all the time. But the match went according to plan. 15 years ago, Batista had defeated Triple H at WrestleMania. Now, Triple H defeated him. The balance was restored. Angie was waiting for him behind the curtain, just like she was after his big title win 15 years ago. The two are no longer married, but something inside them keeps them together. I'm very proud of him. There was a lot of sacrifice along the way. Dave was visibly relieved after the match. He'd once again overcome his self-doubts. He was satisfied with himself and his performance. It's been a hell of a career. I'm very proud of it. Proud of my career. I feel like I can retire in peace. A lot of things have changed since the end of his wrestling career. Today, Dave Batista is almost unrecognizable. He lost a lot of muscle mass for an acting role. He is no longer the giant powerhouse from wrestling. Dave feels good about this transformation. The last time he was this slim was when he was 19, back when he used to respond to big dreams and visions with a tired smile. But some things haven't changed. He loves the spotlight, but hates it at the same time. He needs the quiet to prepare for the loud. He owns a mansion, but he's still searching for a home. When asked in an interview what the story of Dave Bautista is, this is his answer. Poor kid who followed his dreams and chased his dreams. I feel proud.